Anthony, let's get started with the South region, actually. Thursday afternoon. First game on the board. We know bettors are going to be firing left and right on first to 10, first to 20 in the 8-9 matchup. The Louisville Cardinals against the 9-seeded Creighton Blue Jays. Louisville opened as a 1.5 point favorite, quickly bet up to -2.5 as we touched on before we got started. This one has been stale-ish at -2.5 pretty much all week. And -135 on Louisville is where it sits on the money line. Total, really quickly, if I pull it up here, is 145.5. Similarly, across the board, no real disparity in that market either. So we're going to have differing takes on this game. I haven't fired a bet on it yet, but without further ado, how are you looking at this one, Anthony?
Yeah, so I went and pulled up the last few seasons. I think I've bet Creighton in just about every tournament game that they've played for 2 years. Even last year with the miracle cover against Oregon in double overtime, and then they came up short against Tennessee. But I have loved
was that double overtime?
Yeah, the famous Cousinard was going off, and they couldn't stop the rim running from Dante, and then they ran out of gas, and then Creighton covered in double overtime. It was great. And I loved those versions of Creighton. I just don't really think this Creighton is nearly as efficient as the past years. They don't have the same level of shooting. And I think Louisville has enough guys. One, they can throw Hepburn at Ashworth to kind of limit his ability to run this offense. And two, I think you have to have guys who can hit shots, dribble creators off the bounce against the caulk drop, the famed caulk drop. And I think Louisville has that. And I think in the matchup of guards here, I'm going to take Hepburn over Ashworth every day. So I laid it -135 with Louisville. Again, it's a little sacrilegious. It feels a little weird to be against my Blue Jays, but I really have not loved this Creighton team nearly as much. And the big shot volume discussion that dominates the nerdery of college hoops now, like Louisville does project to have considerable advantages there too.
If you want to see a post that pretty much this is a disclaimer of how big of a nerd Anthony is, check out his X page. I saw your eyeballs pop there. Check out his X page and look at his welcome back to baseball post. Is that fair?
Yeah, there's a running joke from a few years ago on Twitter and the guy's like telling his kid to be quiet because he's calculating win probability. So the Phillies are back next Thursday. I have partial season tickets, so like they're my most popular fan team, like the team I root for the most. Not even betting aside. People call me DeBundo. Aaron Nola is my favorite Philly. You can find me calculating win probability in section 136, defending Schwarber as leadoff hitter, or complaining about leaving in a starter too long. So that's kind of and the Tate Frazier had a joke. It was like the media mafia, the metric media mafia, is what he calls the nerds who are like, actually UNC should be in the field because their KenPom is good. Those are kind of you're part of that too. So
but I'm not just staring at KenPom.
That's true.
Because there are people like that. We both know those people who solely look at KenPom ratings as their Bible. But going back to one of your points in the handicap, you mentioned drop coverage, famously with Ryan Kalkbrenner. If you look at three of the best 3-point shooters, this one I'll give you to an extent that Creighton has faced this year. Solo ball, 0 of 4 from 3 in the first matchup against the Jays, then 3 of 5, then 2 of 5. Eric Dixon, 4 of 7, 1 of 5 in Villanova's 2 matchups against Creighton. And then Ryan Conwell, one of the best 3-point shooters in the tournament, 4 of 8, 4 of 6. So they have struggled against elite shooters, but all of those guys are really good shot creators off the dribble. So the one caveat to the Louisville handicap of this, if Terrence Edwards goes off, so be it. I think Louisville wins the game like he did for about a half against Duke in the ACC tournament semifinal. But Renee Smith, who is expected to play, we have no idea if he's close to 100%, 90%. Rumors were that he could have played in the ACC tournament if it was an NCAA tournament game, but all that stuff is kind of hogwash. They're rumors. It's hearsay. You never know with that kind of stuff. I think Creighton matches up well against Renee Smith, regardless of if he's 50%, 60%, 70%, or 100%, just because he's not an elite shot creator off the dribble. He's a really good shooter, and he could space out Creighton's drop coverage. But that said, he's not solo ball. He's not Ryan Condwell. And he's not the other elite shooters that Creighton has faced in Big East play, like Eric Dixon, who's a 3-level scorer, one of the best scorers in college basketball as a stretch big nationally. Statistically, he is one of the best scorers in the country, despite the fact that Villanova couldn't get into the NCAA tournament. Now, the other concern I have for Louisville, they rank well in terms of post-up defense, and obviously they have had injuries throughout the season. Scott statistically grades out well in that category. But you go back to when in the ACC Tournament Championship, not to harp on that game entirely, but Duke had a lot of success down low. Now, I know Malowacz and Kalkbrenner are two very different players. Kalkbrenner is a stretch big to an extent, or more of one, to say the least, than Malowacz. But Malowacz 4 of 6 at the rim, or 5 of 6 actually, at the rim in that game. And you said it well. Hepburn could take away Ashworth. But when Creighton is at its best, I think in Creighton's wins, Kalkbrenner is averaging more than 22 points a game. In their losses, just over 13 points a game. So, yeah, Hepburn against Ashworth, maybe that negates some of Creighton's effectiveness offensively. But if Kalkbrenner is dominating down low, or at least to a certain degree, which I think he'll have a fair amount of success in this game, despite the fact that Louisville has good post-up defense overall. Like I mentioned, Malowacz against Louisville last weekend. There's a path where the line is a bit inflated. I'm going to wait to see if I can get a 3. But if not, you could check out our newsletter right before tip. I may have a bet on Creighton pregame or live. Either way, I'm oppo you on this one.
That's fine. One thing I will say is that I have a pro ACC bias in this tournament. I think, generally speaking, we kind of overreact to what we see in the non-con, and this has played out in a few tournaments now, and we can kind of talk about SEC and Big 12 and Mountain West and ACC and how these certain leagues have performed when everybody's dying to tell you how good or bad a league is. In the case of the SEC, how good the SEC is, and we'll get into that later, and how bad the ACC is. I tend to think we're probably a little biased by what we just saw in small non-conference samples. And so maybe the ACC, which has overperformed March expectations more than any league in the last 2 or 3, 4 years, maybe it's the ACC that's a little underrated in March. And certainly, I mean, with this ranking, with the seed as an 8 seed, I do think that Louisville, and maybe you could argue Creighton too, are a little underrated, underseeded coming into this tournament.
See, my take is actually the antithetical of that, and I do think the ACC is undervalued to an extent in the market. I think that take is, at least for me, I think the Big East is undervalued in this tournament. And that sounds crazy because UConn won back-to-back national titles, but they're an 8 seed. And granted, the market has bet them up from 4.5 to 5.5 against Oklahoma, but before the market steam came in on some other teams in this conference, probably Creighton being the exception, I think you could argue the ACC is certainly undervalued to a certain extent, as I said. But I think the Big East throughout this tournament is going to prove some naysayers wrong, because there has been that take throughout the season. Well, UConn has dropped off, and so has the entire conference. And keep in mind, they only had, 3 teams in the tournament last year?
Yeah, Marquette really fell off in the second half. Xavier ended up like a true bubble team. Villanova hasn't been as good the last few years, and then obviously UConn at the top. So yeah, the league is not as dominant, but we've seen the Big East teams have had success in March as well. So, that kind of gets back to the original point about just kind of like maybe we shouldn't overreact to what we see in the non-con, because once you get to January 1st, your opinion of a conference can't really change. The joke about the SEC going 500, like
Carl Rabbit.
Yeah, Oklahoma's 6 and whatever in the SEC, 6 and 12 or 14, whatever, 14th place in the SEC, and we say that as a tribute to the league and how good it is. But what if it's just a statement on how bad Oklahoma is? That they ran good in the non-con to get where they got, and you're seeing that in the market. UConn, I saw as low as 2.5 with the first opener. Now up over 5. So the market's liked UConn a lot. They were trading well above in the Big East tournament too, well above where you thought they would in those quarterfinal, semifinal games. So I'm not too surprised.
In the semis.
Yeah, they closed -4.5 against Creighton.
Right. And there was a little bit of double overtime steam mixed in with the Jays coming off of the double overtime game against DePaul. But I'm with you on your point.
Yeah. So this is a fun game. It's a really interesting first matchup. And traditionally, I
Pat
lose
Kelsey,
my first bet.
Greg McDermott. Like, this is a borderline, dare I say, elite coaching matchup.
I would agree. I thought Greg was going to be Indiana's next coach, but apparently not.
Yeah, they got a home run hire. One of my friends who's an Indiana alum has the take. I actually haven't heard this out there yet, and we'll get back to games in a second. But he's of the conspiracy theorists that Indiana made the call for West Virginia, and Indiana to miss the NCAA tournament so they could get DeVries as their coach, which honestly isn't that crazy because if both teams are in the tournament, I don't know who Indiana gets. It's not
might have
DeVries.
run another week. You never know. Also, well, the conspiracy runs even deeper now because it's reached X. Twitter has picked up on it. DeVries had this injury that he's been missing.
Right.
And he's got another year of eligibility now. And it's like, oh, wait, was DeVries like secretly masterminding all of this weeks ago when he realized that the team didn't really have the juice and they were kind of fading down the stretch and they got smoked in the conference tournament by a pretty mediocre Colorado team. So people are looking around like, wait, you were here for 1 year, man. What happened? So,
yeah, right. He has been one of the hottest coaching candidates on the board going back to his run at Drake. So it's going to be fascinating watching Tucker DeVries at Assembly Hall. At the very least, he's going to put up a ton of points. And my buddy, who's an Indiana alum and a diehard Hoosiers fan, he and his Indiana friends are going to have a ton of fun watching Indiana at least probably put up some high totals. Listen, it's much better than Indiana getting Ben McCollum. Let's put it that way. Dead last in pace this season. Imagine Indiana fans going from even what Mike Woodson is and his dinosaur offense to Ben McCollum running the slowest offense in college basketball. Needless to say, I think they would be wearing maybe half a garbage bag at Assembly Hall next season, just from the sense that they're running a gross, slow-paced offense. Maybe not as gross and dinosaur-esque as what Mike Woodson ran the last 3 or 4 years at his alma mater.